The scent of betrayal is sharper than any perfume. For Isabella, it clung to the silk lapels of her husband's custom suits, a phantom fragrance amidst the aroma of wealth and success. He was Julian, the city's real estate king, and she was his adoring pregnant wife. Their life was a fairy tale spun from gold and whispered promises. But a single anonymous message, a grainy photo of Julian's hand, his signet ring unmistakable, resting on a woman's thigh in a place he shouldn't have been, was the pinprick that threatened to unravel it all. What she did next wasn't just about revenge. It was a reckoning. Isabella Rossi Moretti lived a life most people only saw in magazines. Her home, a sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, was a testament to her husband Julian's Midas touch. Julian Moretti wasn't just in real estate. He conquered it. He sculpted the city's skyline, his name etched onto the most prestigious buildings. Their life was a meticulously curated collection of society balls, charity galas, and weekend trips to their estate in the Hamptons. Isabella, with her classical beauty and a grace that seemed innate, was the perfect complement to his ambition. She was the warm heart to his cool, calculated mind, the soft smile that disarmed his business rivals. Now, at 7 months pregnant with their first child, a son, she felt like the final perfect piece of their perfect life had clicked into place. But lately, a subtle disquiet had begun to ripple through the serene waters of her existence. It started with small things, inconsistencies easily explained away. The late-night board meetings that stretched into the early hours of the morning. The scent of an unfamiliar, cloyingly sweet perfume on his clothes when he finally came home, a scent he'd brush off as probably from someone at the office. The way his phone, once casually left on the nightstand, was now perpetually glued to his hand, its screen angled away from her. She had tried to ignore it. Trust was the bedrock of their marriage, she told herself. Julian was a busy man, a titan of industry. The pressures he faced were immense. She was his sanctuary, not his inquisitor. So she'd smile, rub her burgeoning belly, and ask about his day, pushing the tendrils of doubt back into the dark corners of her mind. Their friends, a close-knit circle of the city's elite, saw only the flawless facade. You two are the ultimate power couple. Her friend, Sophia, had sighed dreamily at a recent benefit watching Julian command the room with his easy charm. The way he looks at you, Isa, it's like you're the only person in the world. And he did look at her that way in public. His hand was always possessively on the small of her back, his eyes full of adoration. He would speak glowingly of his beautiful, brilliant wife and the son she was carrying, his heir. It was a masterful performance, and for a long time Isabella had believed every word. The first real crack in the veneer appeared on a Tuesday. Julian had called to say he was stuck in a marathon negotiation with a Japanese consortium and wouldn't be home until after midnight. He sounded tired, stressed. Isabella had murmured her support, told him not to worry, and settled in for a quiet evening. Later that night, scrolling through Instagram, she saw a story posted by Marco Julian's perpetually single playboy cousin. The video was a cacophony of loud music, flashing lights and champagne bottles. And in the background, for a fleeting second, she saw him, Julian. He wasn't in a stuffy boardroom. He was at a newly opened exclusive club, laughing a drink in his hand, his arm draped casually around the shoulders of a woman with fiery red hair. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. It had to be a mistake, a trick of the light. She replayed the video again and again, zooming in until the image became a pixelated mess. But there was no mistaking the sharp cut of his jaw, the glint of his ridiculously expensive watch. When he came home at 2 a.m., smelling faintly of whiskey, and that same sweet perfume. She confronted him. She kept her voice steady, her hands clasped tightly over her belly, as if to protect her son from the poison seeping into the air. "How was the meeting with the Japanese consortium?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. Julian loosened his tie, his face a mask of exhaustion. "Brutal. They're tough negotiators. But I think we're close to a deal." Marco's Instagram story told a different story. She said the words falling like ice chips into the silence. For the first time, she saw a flicker of panic in his eyes, quickly masked by annoyance. "Oh, for God's sake, Issa. I stopped by for one drink. One. Marco dragged me out. I was trying to decompress after a hellish day. You can't possibly be jealous of my own cousin." He was so good at it. The way he twisted the narrative, making her feel unreasonable, clingy. He painted her concern as a symptom of pregnancy hormones, her intuition as insecurity. He kissed her forehead, his lips cool, and whispered, "You and this little guy are my whole world. You know that." She let him placate her. She let him lead her to bed and hold her, his breathing evening out into the steady rhythm of sleep, while she lay awake, staring into the darkness, the image of the redhead seared into her mind. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and now they were beginning to sprout. The anonymous message arrived a week later. It was a simple text from an unknown number, a single high-resolution photograph. No words, just the image. It depicted the interior of a lavish hotel room. In the foreground, a woman's manicured hand nails, painted a deep crimson, rested possessively on a man's thigh. The man's hand was covering hers, and on his pinky finger, unmistakable, was the Moretti signet ring, a platinum band with a black onyx stone, an heirloom passed down through Julian's family for generations. He never took it off. Isabella's breath hitched. Her world, so carefully constructed, tilted on its axis. This was different from a blurry Instagram video. This was deliberate, malicious. Someone wanted her to see this. Her first instinct was to throw her phone against the wall to shatter the screen and the sickening image it displayed. But a cold, unfamiliar calm washed over her. Tears wouldn't solve this. Hysteria wouldn't change the reality of that photograph. She saved the image, her fingers moving with a detached precision, and then deleted the message. For the next 48 hours, Isabella became a ghost in her own life. She moved through the motions, her smile a little too bright, her laughter a little too brittle. She went to her prenatal yoga class, had lunch with Sophia, and discussed nursery colors with her interior designer. All the while, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations and scenarios. She started to dig. Quietly, discreetly. She remembered the name of the club from Marco's video, Oblivion. A quick search revealed it was the city's newest, most exclusive hotspot, notoriously difficult to get into. Julian wasn't just decompressing. He was at the epicenter of the city's nightlife. The biggest clue, however, came from Julian himself. He announced he had to fly to Chicago for a 2-day business trip, an urgent matter concerning a new skyscraper project. He was apologetic, showering her with affection and promises to make it up to her. "I wish you could come with me," he'd said, stroking her cheek. "But the flight and the stress, it's not good for you or the baby right now." He packed his designer suitcase, and Isabella watched him, a hollow ache in her chest. She helped him choose his ties. Her touch lingering on the fine silk, the scent of his cologne filling her senses. It was a macabre pantomime of a loving marriage. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, Isabella sprang into action. She didn't call the airline to confirm his flight to Chicago. She didn't need to. Her gut, a primal instinct sharpened by pregnancy and betrayal, told her he wasn't going to Chicago. Instead, she made a different call. She hired a private investigator, a discreet professional recommended by her father, a shrewd lawyer who had always been wary of Julian's slick charm. She didn't tell her father why, only that she needed some due diligence on a business matter. The investigator, a former detective named Frank, was expensive and efficient. "I need to know where my husband Julian Moretti is staying for the next 2 nights," she told him, her voice firm. "He's supposed to be in Chicago. I suspect he is not." Frank was unfazed. "Do you have a recent photo?" "I have something better," Isabella replied. She sent him the anonymous picture. "His signet ring is unique, and I have a list of his recent credit card charges." Within hours, Frank called back. The credit card had been used not for a flight to Chicago, but for a 2-night booking at one of New York's most opulent and discreet hotels, the Baccarat Hotel. It was a palace of crystal and crimson, a haven for the ultra-wealthy seeking privacy and indulgence. It was also less than 20 blocks from their penthouse. "He checked in an hour ago," Frank reported, his voice devoid of emotion. "Booked the Prestige suite. He's not alone. A woman with red hair checked in with him." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. It was real, all of it. The lies, the perfume, the redhead. He wasn't just cheating. He was doing it in their city, flaunting his deceit, just a stone's throw from their home, from the nursery she was so lovingly preparing for their son. A strange clarity settled over her. The pain was immense, a white-hot agony that threatened to consume her. But beneath the pain, something else was crystallizing. A cold, hard resolve. She wasn't going to be the weeping, hysterical wife. She wouldn't be a victim in her own story. She thanked Frank and told him his services were no longer needed. She didn't need a private investigator to tell her what to do next. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection seemed alien, a pale, drawn woman with haunted eyes, her pregnant belly a stark reminder of everything at stake. Slowly, deliberately, she began to get ready. She showered, letting the hot water sluice away the tremors of shock. She did her hair, styling it into a sleek, elegant chignon. She applied her makeup with a steady hand, choosing a bold red lipstick that was more war paint than cosmetic. Finally, she went to her closet. She bypassed the soft, flowing maternity dresses she usually wore. Instead, she chose a form-fitting black cashmere dress that hugged her curves, showcasing her pregnancy not as a vulnerability, but as a statement of power. She slipped on a pair of low, elegant heels and her favorite diamond earrings, a gift from Julian on their first anniversary. She wanted him to see what he was throwing away. She picked up her purse, her phone, and her keys. As she walked out of the penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars, she felt a profound shift within her. The heartbroken wife was gone. In her place was a woman on a mission. She wasn't going to the Baccarat to cry or to scream. She was going there to reclaim her life. And she had a plan. The lobby of the Baccarat Hotel was a symphony of opulence. Sunlight refracted through colossal crystal chandeliers, scattering rainbows across the polished marble floors. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. In another life, Isabella might have felt at home here. Tonight she felt like a predator stalking her prey. She walked across the lobby with a confidence she didn't feel, her head held high, her gaze fixed straight ahead. The concierge, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, gave her a polite, questioning look. Pregnant women in form-fitting black dresses walking into the Baccarat alone at 9 p.m. were not a common sight. I'm here to see my husband, Isabella said, her voice smooth as silk. Julian Moretti. He's in one of your prestige suites. Of course, madame, the concierge said, his professionalism unwavering. May I call up to the room to announce you? That won't be necessary, Isabella replied, a faint, cold smile playing on her lips. I want to surprise him. She produced a key card from her purse. It wasn't the key to the prestige suite, but a spare key to their own penthouse identical in its design. In the low ambient light, the concierge barely glanced at it. He simply saw the hotel's branding and her confident demeanor. Very well, madame. The prestige suites are on the 25th floor. I know, she said, already moving towards the elevators. The ride up was silent, the mirrored walls of the elevator reflecting 100 Isabellas, all of them looking back at her with the same steely resolve. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She rehearsed the plan in her mind, every step, every word. The hallway on the 25th floor was hushed and dimly lit. Plush carpets muffled her footsteps. She found the suite number Frank had given her, 2501. She could hear the faint sound of music from within. She didn't knock. Instead, she took a deep breath and swiped her own keycard. As she expected, it flashed red. Denied. This was part of the plan. She swiped it again. Red. She took out her phone and dialed the front desk. Hello, she said, her voice now laced with a carefully crafted note of distress. This is Isabella Moretti. I'm trying to get into my suite 2501, and my key isn't working. My husband, Julian, is inside, but he's a very deep sleeper. I'm afraid I'm locked out. My apologies, Mrs. Moretti. We'll send someone from security up with a master key immediately. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm feeling a little unwell. Please hurry. She hung up and leaned against the wall, her hand on her belly. The performance was flawless. Within 2 minutes, a burly security guard arrived, his face etched with concern. Mrs. Moretti. Let's get you inside. He used his master key. The light flashed green, and the lock clicked open. Thank you so much, Isabella breathed, offering him a grateful smile. I'll be fine now. The guard nodded and retreated down the hall. Isabella pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The suite was breathtaking. A wall of windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering Manhattan skyline. A half-empty bottle of champagne sat in a silver bucket, 2 glasses beside it. A woman's designer handbag was slung over a chair, and a pair of red-soled heels were kicked off haphazardly on the floor. And there they were, Julian and the redhead. They were on the plush velvet sofa, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights. They weren't in a passionate embrace. They were talking, their heads close together. The woman was crying, her shoulders shaking. Julian was holding her hand, the same hand from the photograph, and speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. They hadn't heard her enter. Isabella stood in the entryway, a silent, avenging angel cloaked in black. For a moment, the sight of them so intimate, so engrossed in each other, sent a fresh wave of agony through her. The plan. The resolve, it all wavered. The primal urge to scream, to lash out, to shatter this tableau of betrayal was overwhelming. But then she saw the woman's face more clearly in the dim light. She was young, younger than Isabella, and her face, though beautiful, was streaked with tears and etched with a desperation that Isabella hadn't expected. Julian murmured something Isabella couldn't hear. The woman shook her head, pulling her hand away. No, Julian, I can't. It's too much. What about your wife? The sound of her own title, your wife, spoken by her husband's mistress, was the final galvanizing shock. It snapped everything back into focus. Isabella took a step forward, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. "Yes, Julian," she said, her voice ringing out in the sudden silence, clear and cold as a winter morning. "What about your wife?" Julian's head whipped around. The color drained from his face. His eyes, wide with shock and guilt, looked as if he had seen a ghost. The redhead gasped, scrambling to her feet, trying to smooth down her silk blouse. "Isabella," Julian stammered, rising slowly. What are you doing here? I thought you were at home." This isn't what it looks like," Isabella finished for him, a humorless laugh escaping her lips. "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like. You in a 5-star hotel suite that you booked under a false pretense. A business trip to Chicago, I believe it was. And you—" she said, her gaze shifting to the redhead, her eyes sweeping over the woman with a cool, dismissive appraisal. "Must be the Japanese consortium." The woman flinched as if struck. "Please," she whispered, "you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Isabella said, taking another deliberate step into the room. "I understand that my husband is a liar and a cheat. And I understand that you are the woman he's lying and cheating with." "Isa, listen to me," Julian pleaded, taking a step towards her, his hands outstretched. "We need to talk. This is a complicated situation." "Stay where you are," Isabella commanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous low. He froze. She walked past them, her movements fluid and unhurried. She didn't look at them. Instead, her eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. Their city. "It's a beautiful view," she said softly, almost to herself. "You always did have a taste for the dramatic, Julian." She turned back to face them. The shock on their faces was palpable. They had expected tears, screaming a dramatic scene. They had not expected this icy calm, this terrifying composure. "You know," Isabella continued, her voice conversational, "I've been thinking a lot about our life. This perfect life we've built. The penthouse, the parties, the dynasty." She placed a hand on her belly. "And I've realized something. It's all based on a lie." "That's not true," Julian insisted, his voice rising. "I love you. What happened here? It was a mistake. A terrible mistake." "A mistake," Isabella repeated, her eyebrows raised. "Booking a suite for 2 nights is a mistake. Lying to your pregnant wife is a mistake. Or was the mistake getting caught?" She looked at the crying woman, who now seemed to be shrinking under her gaze. "And you? Do you love him? Is that your excuse? Or is it the money? The lifestyle? Did you think you could replace me? That you could be the next Mrs. Moretti?" Before the woman could answer, Isabella turned her back on them again and walked towards the door. Julian let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He thought she was leaving. He thought the worst was over. He was wrong. Isabella paused at the door. She didn't turn around. "You're right about one thing, Julian," she said, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. "This is a complicated situation, and it's about to get a lot more complicated." And then she did something that no one, not Julian, not the redhead, not even Isabella herself until that very moment, could have ever predicted. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Then she pulled out a small, high-tech device and pressed a button. A tiny red light on the device began to blink. With a final, chillingly calm statement, she said, "Everything from this point forward is on the record." She then opened the door, but didn't leave. Instead, she held it open, and two uniformed police officers who had been waiting silently in the hallway stepped into the room. Julian and his mistress stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Julian Moretti," Isabella said, her voice now devoid of all emotion. "I'd like to introduce you to Officer Miller and Officer Davis. They're here to take my statement. I'm filing a report. You see, I've just discovered that my husband has been using our joint assets to fund a rather expensive side project. And I have reason to believe this project involves fraud, embezzlement, and a number of other financial crimes. And I have all the proof I need right here." She held up her phone, the screen glowing. The anonymous photo was now the wallpaper. "You're bluffing," Julian snarled, his mask of contrition slipping to reveal a flash of his ruthless business persona. "You have nothing." "Don't I?" Isabella replied, her smile razor-sharp. She turned to the officers. "Gentlemen, my husband has been making a series of unauthorized multi-million-dollar transfers from our joint accounts to a shell corporation. A corporation I've just discovered that is registered to this young lady right here." She gestured towards the redhead, who looked as if she was about to faint. "Her name," Isabella said, the final word landing with the force of a guillotine, "is Chloe Vance, and I believe she and my husband have been defrauding me and his company for a very, very long time." The room fell silent, the only sound the distant wail of a city siren. Isabella hadn't come for a confrontation. She had come for a detonation, and she had just lit the fuse. The real drama, she knew, was only just beginning. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic tableau of disbelief. Julian, for the first time in his life, was rendered speechless. His face, usually a canvas of confident charm, was a contorted mask of fury and panic. Chloe Vance, the redhead, simply crumpled onto the expensive rug, sobbing hysterically. The police officers Miller and Davis were the picture of professional calm, though their eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise. This was not their usual domestic dispute call. "Ma'am," Officer Miller began addressing Isabella. "Embezzlement and fraud are serious allegations. We'll need to take a formal statement downtown." "Of course," Isabella said smoothly. "I have my lawyer meeting me there. I also have a full dossier of financial records, bank statements, and wire transfers prepared. I believe you'll find it very illuminating." She glanced at Julian, a sliver of ice in her gaze. "My husband is very meticulous. He leaves a very clear paper trail." Julian finally found his voice, a low, dangerous growl. "Isabella, you have no idea what you're doing. You're destroying everything. Our family. Our future." "Our future," she retorted, her voice dripping with scorn. "You destroyed our future the moment you decided to build a second one in this hotel room. As for our family," she placed a protective hand over her belly, "I'm protecting it. I'm protecting our son from a world built on your lies." She turned to the sobbing Chloe. "And you? You might want to call a lawyer. I imagine you'll be needing one." With that, Isabella turned and walked out of the suite, leaving behind the wreckage of her marriage. She didn't look back. As she rode the crystal elevator down, her reflection in the mirrored walls seemed different again. The avenging angel was gone. In her place was a queen who had just checkmated the king. The next few hours were a blur of fluorescent lights and legal jargon at the police station. Her father's lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Albright, was already there, having been briefed by Isabella in a frantic whispered phone call just before she'd left the penthouse. Ms. Albright reviewed the file Isabella had painstakingly compiled over the last 48 hours. It was more than just a suspicion. Using a backdoor login to their shared financial portal, a detail Julian had arrogantly assumed she would never understand, Isabella had traced a pattern of systematic withdrawals. Millions of dollars siphoned from a joint investment account into a shell corporation named CV Enterprises. CV. Chloe Vance. It was almost insultingly simple. This is comprehensive. Ms. Albright said, her expression a mixture of impressed and appalled. He got sloppy arrogant. He used your joint funds, which makes it a clear case of fraudulent conversion. We can freeze his assets, and by extension, hers, pending the investigation. The wheels of justice, lubricated by the Moretti name and the sheer scale of the alleged fraud, began to turn with surprising speed. By dawn, a court order had been issued. Julian Moretti's personal and a significant portion of his business accounts were frozen. News travels fast in the upper echelons of New York society. By the time the sun rose over the city, the whispers had begun. Julian Moretti, the real estate titan, was under investigation. Isabella returned to the penthouse as the sky was turning from indigo to pale grey. The apartment felt vast and empty. The scent of Julian's cologne still lingered in the air, a ghostly presence. She walked into the nursery, the soft blues and creams, a stark contrast to the ugliness of the night. She sank into the rocking chair, her body finally succumbing to the exhaustion. She hadn't just exposed an affair. She had declared war. She knew Julian. He wouldn't go down without a fight. He would use every weapon in his arsenal, his money, his power, his influence, to crush her. He would paint her as a vindictive, hormonal, scorned wife. But as she sat there in the quiet sanctuary she had created for her son, a new unsettling thought began to creep in. Julian was a brilliant, ruthless businessman. But he was also obsessively protective of his public image and his company. The way he had funneled the money was clumsy, almost amateurish. For a man who navigated billion-dollar deals with surgical precision, creating a shell corporation with his mistress's initials was laughably transparent. Why was it just arrogance? Did he underestimate her that completely? Or was there something else? Something more complex than a simple sordid affair funded by marital assets? Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was an unknown number, the same one from the original anonymous message. Her heart pounded. She hesitated, then answered her voice, a hoarse whisper. "Hello." The voice on the other end was distorted, electronically disguised, but clearly male. "You did it," the voice said. "You actually did it." "Who is this?" Isabella demanded, sitting bolt upright. "A friend," the voice replied. "Someone who believes Julian Moretti needs to be stopped. But you've only scratched the surface, Isabella. The affair, the money he stole from you, that's pocket change. It's a symptom of a much deeper disease." "What are you talking about?" "The Chicago project," the voice said, and a chill snaked down Isabella's spine. "There is no skyscraper. There is no deal. Ask Julian about Project Nightingale. Ask him what really happened to his former partner, David Chen." David Chen. Isabella remembered him. A brilliant architect, Julian's partner in their first major development. They had a falling out years ago. Julian had said David had become unstable, unreliable, and that they had parted ways amicably. David had faded from the society pages, and no one ever questioned it. "What about David Chen?" Isabella whispered. David Chen knew about Project Nightingale, and he objected, vehemently. Now he's gone. "Vanished," the voice said. "The money Julian stole from you wasn't for his mistress, Isabella. It was panic money. He's in much deeper trouble than you can possibly imagine. Chloe Vance isn't his lover. She's his leverage." The line went dead. Isabella stared at her phone, her mind reeling. The neat narrative of betrayal and revenge she had constructed had just been shattered. This wasn't just about a cheating husband. She had stumbled into something far more sinister. The affair, the hotel room, the stolen money, it was all a smokescreen. She had thought she was the queen, checkmating the king. But she had just discovered she was a pawn in a much larger, deadlier game. And the real players were only just beginning to reveal themselves. The name Project Nightingale echoed in the silence of the penthouse, a dissonant chord in the symphony of Isabella's new reality. David Chen. Chloe Vance, his leverage. The disjointed pieces of the puzzle floated in her mind, refusing to form a coherent picture. The mysterious caller had reframed everything. She had acted out of personal betrayal, but it seemed she had inadvertently detonated a bomb with a much wider blast radius. Her first call was not to her lawyer, but back to Frank, the private investigator. She needed information, not legal advice. "Frank, it's Isabella Moretti," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I need you to find everything you can on two people. David Chen, an architect and former partner of my husband, and Chloe Vance. I need to know everything. Her background, her family, her financials, who she talks to, everything. And I need you to be invisible. This goes beyond the scope of a standard marital infidelity case, Mrs. Moretti." Frank said, his voice cautious. "I'm well aware of that." "Frank," Isabella replied, a new hardness in her tone. "So will your payment. I'll wire you a retainer. Just find me what I need." While Frank began his digital excavation, Isabella started her own. She turned her pain and anger into fuel for a meticulous, focused investigation. She was no longer just a scorned wife. She was a woman fighting for her son's future, a future that she now realized was entangled in a web of criminality she couldn't yet comprehend. She started with Julian's home office. It was a space she rarely entered, a sanctuary of leather mahogany and ambition. Julian, in his arrogance, had never thought to change the security codes. With trembling fingers, she accessed his desktop computer. For hours she sifted through files, her mind sharp, her focus absolute. Most were legitimate business documents, blueprints and contracts for his myriad real estate projects. But she wasn't looking for the legitimate. She was looking for the hidden, the encrypted, the mislabeled. She found it in a deeply buried subfolder labeled Personal Hobbies. Inside there was a single password-protected file named Nightingale. Her heart hammered. This was it. She tried all the usual passwords, her birthday, their anniversary, his mother's name, the name of his first dog. Nothing. Then a thought struck her. Julian was a narcissist, but a sentimental one in his own way. She typed in the name of the small, obscure vineyard in Tuscany where he had proposed to her. The file opened. It wasn't a document. It was a ledger, a meticulously detailed record of payments, bribes, and kickbacks. The Chicago project was a ghost, a shell used to launder money. The ledger detailed payoffs to city officials, zoning board members, and union leaders, all related to his most recent, most celebrated development, the Olympus Tower. It was his crown jewel, the building that had cemented his legacy. And according to this ledger, it was built on a foundation of corruption. The names on the list were some of the most powerful people in the city. The amounts were staggering. And then she saw the payments to CV Enterprises. They weren't the romantic slush fund of an affair. They were structured, regular payments categorized under consulting and risk assessment. And then she found the entries related to David Chen. There were a series of increasingly large payments to a private security firm known for its ruthless, off-the-books tactics. The final entry, dated almost 2 years ago, was a single massive payment to the same firm with a chillingly simple memo: Final resolution, DC issue. Isabella felt sick. Final resolution. It was a corporate euphemism for something unspeakable. David Chen hadn't just vanished. He had been erased. At that moment, her phone rang. It was Frank. "I have something on Chloe Vance," he said, his voice grim. "She's not who you think she is. She graduated top of her class from MIT with a degree in computer science and cryptography. Worked for a cybersecurity firm for 2 years before quitting to become an independent consultant. But here's the kicker. Her father, Michael Vance, is a senior compliance officer at the SEC. Isabella's blood ran cold. The Securities and Exchange Commission. "And David Chen," she whispered. "That's a ghost story," Frank said. "The man dropped off the face of the earth 2 years ago. No credit card activity, no travel, no digital footprint. But I dug into his old files, his emails before he disappeared. He was communicating with someone at the SEC, an anonymous whistleblower. He was about to expose massive bribery and money laundering in a huge New York real estate project." The pieces slammed into place with dizzying, sickening force. Chloe Vance wasn't Julian's mistress. She was his blackmailer. Or worse. She was the daughter of an SEC officer, a cryptography expert. She had likely discovered the corruption surrounding the Olympus Tower, perhaps through her father, or through her own skills. She had Julian cornered. The payments to her consulting firm weren't for her silence about an affair. They were for her silence about a criminal enterprise that could send Julian and half of the city's elite to prison for the rest of their lives. The affair, the hotel room, it was a performance, a charade. But for whose benefit? And then the most terrifying realization of all dawned on Isabella. Chloe had been crying in that hotel room. She had looked desperate, trapped. "I can't. It's too much," she had said. She wasn't an ice-cold blackmailer in control of the situation. She was a pawn, just like Isabella. But if Chloe was a pawn, who was the player Julian? He had orchestrated the entire scene. He had known somehow that Isabella was suspicious. He had lured her to the baccarat. He wanted her to find them. He wanted her to react, to call the police, to file a report. But he wanted her to report the wrong crime. He had presented her with a simple, believable story of infidelity and embezzlement, a messy public but ultimately containable domestic dispute. It was a brilliant, cynical misdirection. By focusing the legal and media attention on his affair with Chloe and the money he stole from their joint account, he was creating a smokescreen to hide the far greater crimes of Project Nightingale. He was sacrificing his marriage to save his empire. He was using his pregnant wife's pain as a shield. And Chloe, she was the designated scapegoat. Julian would likely claim she was the mastermind, an obsessive former employee who had embezzled the money and was blackmailing him. With her father at the SEC, it created a conflict of interest that would mire any investigation in red tape for years. By the time anyone figured out the truth, he would have hidden the real evidence, and covered his tracks. Isabella felt a wave of nausea. She wasn't just fighting a cheating husband. She was fighting a master manipulator, a man so ruthless he would frame his own wife and his accomplice to save himself. She looked at the ledger on the screen, at the names, the dates, the cold, hard numbers that represented a vast criminal conspiracy. She had the truth in her hands. But who would believe her? Julian would paint her as a woman scorned, lashing out with wild, unsubstantiated accusations. No, she couldn't go to the police with this. Not yet. They were already pursuing the embezzlement charge, the narrative Julian wanted them to pursue. She needed a different kind of weapon. She needed to dismantle his empire from the inside out. She saved a copy of the Nightingale ledger to a highly encrypted thumb drive. She then permanently erased the original file from Julian's computer using a secure deletion program to wipe it clean. Let him think his secret was still safe. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. He's smarter than you think. The Baccarat was a stage. You were the lead actress in a play he wrote. Be careful. You're not the only one he's underestimated. The message confirmed her terrifying conclusion. Her mysterious friend knew Julian's game. Isabella stood up, the cold resolve returning stronger than ever. Julian had intended for her to be a pawn. He had miscalculated. He had forgotten who she was. She was not just Isabella Moretti, the society wife. She was the daughter of a brilliant lawyer, a woman with intelligence, resources, and a will of iron. He had built an empire of glass and steel on a foundation of lies. She would be the architect of its ruin. And she would do it not with a wrecking ball, but with a surgeon's scalpel. She would take everything from him. His money, his power, his freedom, his legacy. She would leave him with nothing but the rubble of the life he had so casually destroyed. Her phone rang one more time. This time it was an unsaved number, but the caller ID showed a name. Chloe Vance. Isabella stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The pawn was calling the queen. She took a deep breath and answered the call. The next move in the game had just begun. Don't hang up. Chloe Vance's voice was a frantic whisper, stripped of the feigned confidence Isabella had seen in the hotel suite. Please, we need to talk. Not on the phone. Meet me. Isabella was silent for a moment, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, another move in Julian's elaborate game. But the raw fear in Chloe's voice sounded genuine. Where? Isabella asked, her tone flat and devoid of warmth. Do you know the Jefferson Market Garden in Greenwich Village? It's public open. In an hour. Please. I can explain everything. He'll kill me, Isabella. I think he'll actually kill me. The last words were choked out in a sob before the line went dead. Isabella stood frozen. He'll kill me. The words echoed the chilling memo from the Nightingale ledger. Final resolution. DC issue. Julian wasn't just a white-collar criminal. He was dangerous. This changed the stakes entirely. Her plan for a slow, meticulous dismantling of his empire felt inadequate in the face of such a direct threat. She looked at the encrypted thumb drive in her hand. This was her leverage, her weapon. But a weapon was useless if the enemy struck first. She agreed to the meeting. But she wouldn't go alone. She called Frank. Change of plans. I need you with me. Jefferson Market Garden. 1 hour. Be my shadow. If anything looks wrong, you call the number I'm about to give you. It's a direct line to a friend of my father's at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Tell him to execute the Isabella contingency. She had no such contingency, but Frank didn't need to know that. He just needed to understand the gravity of the situation. The Jefferson Market Garden was a small oasis of green nestled among the brownstones of the village. Isabella chose a bench in a secluded corner, her back to a brick wall, giving her a clear view of the entrance. She wore oversized sunglasses, and a simple saw of her pregnant belly the only recognizable feature. A few minutes later, she saw Chloe slip through the gate. Chloe looked nothing like the glamorous woman from the baccarat. She was pale and drawn, wearing a simple hoodie and jeans. Her fiery red hair was scraped back into a messy ponytail. She scanned the garden nervously, her eyes wide with fear, before spotting Isabella. She approached cautiously and sat on the opposite end of the bench, as if afraid to get too close. "Thank you for coming," Chloe whispered, wringing her hands. "I'm not here to make friends," Isabella said coldly. "You have 5 minutes to convince me that you aren't a part of my husband's plan to ruin my life." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "I am part of his plan, but not in the way you think. I never slept with him, Isabella. Not once. The whole thing, the affair, it was a fabrication, his fabrication." "I've already figured that much out," Isabella said, her words sharp. "I know about Project Nightingale. I know about the Olympus Tower. And I know what happened to David Chen." The color drained completely from Chloe's face. She looked utterly terrified. How? How do you know that my husband isn't the only one who underestimates me?" Isabella replied. "Now start talking. Why you—" Chloe took a shaky breath. "My father. He's a compliance officer at the SEC. A few years ago, he was assigned to a preliminary inquiry into Julian's company. It was anonymous, based on a tip. My father is meticulous, a good man. He found irregularities that pointed to massive bribery, but he had no hard proof. The inquiry stalled." She continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I made a mistake. I was arrogant. I was working in cybersecurity, and I thought I could help. I used my skills to breach Moretti Enterprises' servers from the outside. I was looking for the proof my father needed. And I found it. I found everything. Project Nightingale, the ledger, the bribes, the cover-up of David Chen's disappearance." "So you decided to blackmail him?" Isabella asked, a note of contempt in her voice. "No," Chloe insisted, her voice cracking. "I never wanted his money. I was going to turn the evidence over to my father. But he found me. I don't know how. He's always one step ahead. One night he was just there, waiting for me in my apartment. He didn't threaten me, not directly. He was charming. He told me he admired my skills. He said he was impressed." She shuddered at the memory. "He showed me pictures of my father, my mother, my younger sister at college. He knew their routines, their schedules. He never said a word, but the message was clear. If I went to the authorities, my family would pay the price." The cold, calculated cruelty of it was pure Julian. Isabella felt a flicker of something she didn't expect: empathy. "He forced me to work for him," Chloe continued, her voice trembling. "He said he needed my skills to secure his operations. He created CV Enterprises and started funneling money into it. He said it was for my services, but I knew it was to implicate me, to bind me to him. If he went down, I would go down with him. And my father's career would be destroyed by the scandal of his own daughter being involved." "And the scene at the baccarat," Isabella prompted. "That was his master stroke," Chloe said bitterly. "He told me a few days ago that there was a new problem. His wife. You. He said you were getting suspicious. He laid out the whole plan. We were to stage a fake affair. He would steal money from your joint account and put it in my company's name. He said you were emotional predictable, that you would find us, and in a fit of jealous rage, you'd report him for the affair and for stealing from you. A domestic crime. She looked Isabella directly in the eye. It was all to control the narrative, to give the police and the press a simple, juicy story to chase so they would never look for the real one. He was going to sacrifice his marriage to bury a mass conspiracy. He was going to let me take the fall as the manipulative mistress who drove him to it. He told me if I played my part convincingly, he would let my family go. Isabella processed the information, her mind connecting it to what she already knew. It was a perfect, horrifyingly elegant plan, and it almost worked. "Why are you telling me this now?" Isabella asked, her voice still cautious. "What's changed?" "Yesterday," Chloe whispered, her eyes darting around the garden nervously. "After the police came, he called me. He wasn't charming anymore. He was furious. He said, you didn't play your part right. She was too calm, too prepared. She knows something. He said I had become a loose end, just like David Chen." The terror in Chloe's eyes was primal. "He's going to clean house, Isabella. He's going to get rid of me. And then I don't know what he'll do to you. You're the only other person who can expose him. He won't let you have that baby. He won't let his dynasty be born from a woman who defied him." A wave of protective fury washed over Isabella, so fierce it almost made her dizzy. The threat was no longer just to her, but to her unborn child. She made a decision. It was risky, reckless even, but it was the only path she saw. "You said you breached his servers," Isabella said, her voice now sharp and commanding. "That means you can get back in." Chloe looked confused. Probably. His internal security is good, but I built some of the back doors myself." "Good," Isabella said, a plan forming with lightning speed. "Julian thinks he's controlling the narrative. We're going to change it. He wants a media scandal. We'll give him one, but not the one he's expecting." She leaned forward, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "He thinks his Nightingale ledger is safe. I've erased his copy, but I have one." She patted her purse where the thumb drive was safely tucked away. "You're a cryptography expert. I need you to leak it, not to the police, not to the SEC, to the press." Chloe stared at her aghast. "The press? They'll tear me apart." "My name is on those transactions." "They will," Isabella agreed. "At first. But you're going to leak it along with a signed, sworn affidavit. You will confess to everything, to hacking his company, to the blackmail, to the creation of CV Enterprise. You will frame yourself as the villain of the story, a brilliant but greedy hacker who got in over her head. But you will also provide them with the unredacted ledger, every name, every bribe." "Why would I do that?" Chloe choked out. "I'd be confessing to multiple felonies because," Isabella said, her gaze intense, "it's the only way to make them believe the ledger is real. It's too big, too explosive. If it comes from an anonymous source, they'll dismiss it as a fabrication. But if it comes from a named source who is confessing her own role in the crime, an insider, they'll have to investigate, and you'll have an immunity deal." "An immunity deal?" "My lawyer is one of the best in the city," Isabella explained. "You will walk into the U.S. Attorney's office tomorrow morning with her. You will present yourself as a cooperating witness. You'll give them everything they need to convict not just Julian, but every corrupt official on that list. In exchange for your full cooperation, you'll get transactional immunity. You'll walk away a free woman." It was a breathtakingly audacious plan. To fight Julian's fire, Isabella was prepared to start an inferno. She was offering Chloe a way out, but it required the younger woman to walk through fire first. Chloe was silent for a long time, her face a turmoil of fear and indecision. She looked at Isabella, at this pregnant woman, who had every reason to hate her, who was now offering her a lifeline. "Why are you helping me?" Chloe finally whispered. "Because my husband is a monster who preys on the vulnerable," Isabella said, her voice cold as steel. "He tried to use you, and he tried to use me. And because I have no intention of letting my son be born into a world where Julian Moretti holds any power whatsoever, we are going to burn his kingdom to the ground and salt the earth behind us." In the quiet green of the garden, amidst the blooming flowers, an unholy alliance was forged. The wife and the scapegoat, the queen and the pawn. Together they were about to unleash a storm that would bring the city's most powerful man to his knees. The next 24 hours would change everything. The story of Isabella Moretti isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a testament to the underestimated power of a woman pushed to the edge. It's a reminder that beneath a surface of grace and elegance can lie a will of iron and a brilliant strategic mind. She took her pain and forged it not into a weapon of blind rage, but into a key that unlocked a conspiracy, saved a life, and exposed the rot hiding beneath the city's gilded facade. Her actions shocked everyone, not because they were destructive, but because they were masterful. She didn't just tear down her husband's house of cards. She reshuffled the entire deck. The air in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, New York, crackled with anticipation. Each champagne flute a tiny shimmering star in a galaxy of wealth. Tonight, my husband, Adrian Sterling, the golden boy of tech, was to be crowned Philanthropist of the Year. He stood at the podium, a vision of success in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo basking in the adoring glow of the city's elite. But as his perfectly rehearsed speech began, his 7 months pregnant wife, Isabella, walked not towards my seat, but towards the stage, a single USB drive clutched in my trembling hand. They were all about to learn the truth behind the millions he so generously gave away. A truth he had buried. A truth that was about to cost him everything. The St. Regis, New York was a palace of dreams, and tonight it was our kingdom. Or rather, it was Adrian's. Isabella Sterling, was merely his most prized possession. The beautiful soon-to-be mother of his heir, draped in vintage Dior, and dripping in diamonds that felt more like jeweled shackles with each passing society event. From our table at the forefront of the grand ballroom, I had a perfect view of the stage where the Global Philanthropy Forum annual awards were being held. The name itself was a testament to the scale of Adrian's ambition, an event he had meticulously orchestrated to cement his legacy not just as a titan of industry, but as a savior of humanity. The air hummed with the soft murmur of the city's most powerful voices, a symphony of self-congratulation and whispered deals. The clinking of crystal glasses and the subtle flash of paparazzi bulbs at the room's periphery added to the surreal, almost suffocating glamour of it all. Adrian was a master of this universe. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, his hand possessively on the small of my back, a charming smile permanently affixed to his face. He was the sun around which everyone orbitated his charisma, a gravitational pull that was impossible to resist. He would laugh a deep, resonant sound that made women blush and men feel instantly at ease. He would quote market statistics and then seamlessly transition to a heartfelt anecdote about a recent trip to a developing nation, his eyes glistening with what I now knew to be manufactured sincerity. Isn't he wonderful? A woman whose name I'd long forgotten gushed her face, a taut mask of admiration and envy. What he's doing for sustainable agriculture in Africa, it's simply revolutionary." I smiled, a practiced, hollow gesture that didn't quite reach my eyes. "He's a very driven man," I replied, my voice a soft murmur that was easily lost in the din. Driven. That was one word for it. Obsessed, ruthless, and pathologically deceptive were others that had been circling my mind for weeks, a flock of vultures waiting for the opportune moment to descend. The first crack in the flawless facade of our life had appeared 3 months ago, a hairline fracture that had since splintered into a chasm. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Adrian always went for his weekly boys' club poker night on Tuesdays. He'd kissed me goodbye, his lips cool against my cheek, the scent of his expensive cologne lingering in the air, long after the purr of his Aston Martin had faded down our long-gated driveway. I had been feeling particularly unwell that evening, the baby kicking with a restless energy that mirrored my own. Unable to sleep, I'd wandered into Adrian's home office, a sleek, minimalist space dominated by a massive mahogany desk. I was looking for a book, something to distract me from the gnawing loneliness that had become my constant companion in our cavernous mansion. That's when I saw it. His personal laptop, the one he guarded more fiercely than the Hope Diamond, was open. He never left it open. He had a whole ritual of shutting it down, a series of clicks and whirs that signaled the end of his workday and the beginning of his carefully curated home life. My heart had given a nervous little flutter. It felt like a violation of some unspoken treaty, but a stronger, more primal curiosity propelled me forward. His email was open. The subject line of the most recent message from a name I didn't recognize, Marcus Thorne, read, "Urgent, the charity account." My hand trembled as I clicked it open. The email was short, cryptic, but its implications were devastating. Adrian, the transfer for the West African Agricultural Fund needs to be expedited. The auditors from the real foundation are getting suspicious. The numbers aren't adding up on their end. We're funneling too much through the Shell Corp. This isn't sustainable. We need to talk. Now. I sank into Adrian's plush leather chair, the room suddenly spinning. Shell Corp, real foundation. The words swam before my eyes, meaningless, and yet terrifyingly significant. The West African Agricultural Fund was his flagship project, the one that had earned him tonight's award. He'd spoken about it with such passion, his eyes alight as he described the new irrigation systems, the empowered local farmers, the thriving communities he was single-handedly building. I had been his most ardent supporter, his sounding board, the one who had listened with rapt attention to his every ambition. I had believed in him, in the beautiful lie he had so expertly woven around us. For weeks, I lived in a state of quiet panic, a silent scream trapped in my throat. I watched him more closely, my love and admiration slowly curdling into a nauseous suspicion. I saw the way his eyes would dart to his phone when a certain notification sound chimed, the way he would end calls with a clipped "I'll call you back" whenever I entered the room. The poker nights became more frequent, his business trips longer and more opaque. He was a ghost in our own home, his physical presence a constant, painful reminder of the emotional chasm that had opened between us. He would come home late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't mine, a faint floral scent that clung to the fibers of his expensive suits. When I'd confronted him, my voice shaking, he had laughed it off. "Darling, you're being hysterical. It's the pregnancy hormones. You know how many people I have to meet, the endless networking." He'd tilt my chin up, his thumb stroking my cheek in a gesture that was once reassuring, but now felt like a silken threat. "Don't you trust me?" And that was the question, wasn't it? Trust. It was the foundation of our marriage, the bedrock upon which we had built our life together. And it was crumbling to dust beneath my feet. My breaking point came a week before the awards ceremony. I had hired a private investigator, a former detective with sad, knowing eyes, who had listened to my story without a hint of judgment. It was the most terrifying and empowering thing I had ever done. The initial report arrived in a plain brown envelope delivered by a discreet messenger. Inside were photographs. Adrian not in a stuffy boardroom, but on a sun-drenched balcony of a boutique hotel in the city, his arm wrapped around a woman with fiery red hair and a laugh that seemed to echo even in the still image. They were kissing a passionate, unrestrained kiss that was a world away from the chaste public pecks he bestowed upon me. Her name, the report stated, was Serena Vance, a junior analyst at his company. But the real gut punch came in the second part of the report. The investigator had managed to access the bank statements for the shell corporation Marcus Thorne had mentioned in the email. The West African Agricultural Fund was a ghost. The millions of dollars that were supposed to be building a better future for impoverished farmers were being funneled into offshore accounts funding a lifestyle of extravagant excess for Adrian and his cronies. There were payments for yachts, private jets, and a lavish penthouse apartment in Serena's name. My husband, the celebrated philanthropist, was a fraud. He wasn't saving the world. He was robbing it blind. Now sitting at this table surrounded by the very people he had deceived, a cold, hard certainty settled in my heart. The nausea and the fear were gone, replaced by a steely resolve that felt foreign and yet strangely familiar. It was the fierce protective instinct of a mother, a lioness defending her cub from the jackal in its den. This baby, my baby, would not be born into a legacy of lies. Adrian caught my eye from across the room and gave me a brilliant, confident smile, a silent, "I love you," mouthed in my direction. I didn't smile back. I simply held his gaze, my expression unreadable, a silent promise of the storm that was about to break. He frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his handsome features, before he was swept away by another well-wisher. The master of ceremonies, a B-list actor, whose career had seen better days, was now on stage, his voice booming through the speakers as he began the glowing introduction for the final, most prestigious award of the evening. "A man of vision," he declared, his voice dripping with sycophantic praise. "A true humanitarian whose boundless generosity is changing the world as we know it. Ladies and gentlemen, the recipient of this year's Global Philanthropy Forum, Philanthropist of the Year Award, Mr. Adrian Sterling." The room erupted in thunderous applause. The sound was deafening, a wave of adulation that washed over me, threatening to drown me in its tide. Adrian stood up, buttoning his tuxedo jacket, a look of humble gratitude expertly plastered on his face. He kissed my cheek, a fleeting public gesture of affection that made my skin crawl. "Wish me luck, darling," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "You'll need it," I whispered back, my voice so low that he probably didn't even hear it. As he made his way to the stage, the spotlight following him like a divine halo, I stood up. My legs felt surprisingly steady, my hands no longer trembling. The faces at my table turned to me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. I ignored them. My focus was on one man, and one man only. In my hand, I clutched the small silver USB drive that the investigator had given me. It contained everything: the bank statements, The incriminating emails, the photographs, even a secretly recorded conversation between Adrian and Marcus Thorne, their voices cold and calculating as they discussed their next move. The crowd's applause began to die down as Adrian reached the podium. He adjusted the microphone, his smile radiating a warmth that could melt glaciers. He was about to begin his speech, a masterpiece of deception that I had heard him practice in front of the mirror for weeks, but he would never get to deliver it. With every eye in the room on the man of the hour, I began my slow, deliberate walk towards the stage. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, deafening silence that was starting to fall over the ballroom as people began to notice the pregnant woman in Dior, making her unscheduled ascent. Adrian's smile faltered as he saw me. The confusion in his eyes morphed into a flicker of panic, then a flash of cold, hard anger. He gave a subtle shake of his head, a silent command for me to return to my seat. I kept walking. My journey from our table to the foot of the stage felt like traversing a vast alien landscape. The plush crimson carpet seemed to stretch for miles, each step a deliberate act of defiance. The air once filled with the celebratory hum of the elite had grown heavy, thick with a palpable sense of confusion and unease. The whispers started as a low murmur, a ripple spreading from the tables closest to the stage, and quickly grew into a wave of hushed speculation. What is she doing? Is she unwell? The pregnancy? This is highly inappropriate. It's Adrian's moment. I heard their words, but they were distant like the buzz of insects on a hot summer's day. They were part of the scenery, the backdrop to the only thing that mattered, the truth. My gaze remained locked on Adrian. His carefully constructed mask of confident charm was beginning to crack, the polished veneer chipping away to reveal the raw panic beneath. His eyes, which a moment ago had held the adoring gaze of hundreds, were now fixed on me wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. He looked like a cornered animal, his instincts screaming at him to either fight or flee. As I reached the short flight of stairs leading up to the stage, a security guard, a burly man with a concerned expression, moved to intercept me. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, respectful rumble. "I'm sorry, but you can't be up here right now." I looked at him, and for the first time that evening, I allowed a genuine emotion to surface. It wasn't anger or hatred, but a profound, heart-wrenching sadness. "Please," I said, my voice quiet but firm, imbued with a conviction that gave him pause. "You have to let me pass. It's important." He hesitated, his eyes darting from me to Adrian, who was now gesturing frantically, a silent, desperate command for him to remove me. But something in my eyes, perhaps the glint of unshed tears, or the raw determination of a woman on the brink, made him step aside. I ascended the stairs, the heat of the stage lights a stark contrast to the icy resolve that had taken root in my soul. The silence in the ballroom was now absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb all sound. Every single person in that room, from the waiters standing by the walls to the titans of finance at the front tables, was watching their forks, suspended mid-air, their conversations abandoned. Adrian's voice was a harsh, strained whisper as I came to a stop beside him at the podium. "Isabella, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Get off this stage. Now." His fingers wrapped around my upper arm, his grip surprisingly tight, a painful reminder of the physical strength he usually kept so well hidden. I didn't flinch. I simply looked down at his hand, then back up into his eyes, my own reflecting a cold fire he had never seen before. "Let go of me, Adrian," I said, my voice dangerously calm. He recoiled as if I had struck him, his hand falling away. In that moment, he realized that the compliant, adoring wife he had so carefully molded was gone, replaced by a stranger he could no longer control. I turned to the master of ceremonies, who was hovering uncertainly nearby, his face a mask of bewilderment. "I need to use the microphone," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. He looked at Adrian, then back at me, and then with a shrug of utter defeat, he nodded towards the second microphone on the podium. My hand was surprisingly steady as I adjusted it. I took a deep breath, the scent of expensive floral arrangements and the faint metallic tang of fear filling my lungs. I looked out at the sea of faces staring up at me, a veritable who's who of New York society. These were the people Adrian had courted, the ones whose approval he craved, the ones whose money and influence he had leveraged for his own nefarious ends. They were his enablers, his audience, and now they would be his jury. "Good evening." I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating through the cavernous ballroom with an authority that surprised even me. "My name is Isabella Sterling. For the past 5 years, you have known me as Adrian Sterling's wife. I have stood by his side, smiling, for the cameras, hosting the fundraisers, and believing with all my heart in the incredible philanthropic work he claimed to be doing." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. I could see the confusion on their faces, the dawning realization that this was not a loving wife's impromptu tribute to her husband. This was something else entirely. I believed in the man who spoke with such passion about empowering communities, about lifting people out of poverty, about creating a legacy of hope. I continued, my voice beginning to tremble, not with fear, but with the weight of my unshed tears. I loved that man. But that man, I have come to learn, does not exist. A collective gasp swept through the room. Adrian, who had been frozen in a state of stunned disbelief, finally found his voice. "Isabella, stop this nonsense at once," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that was picked up by the microphone. "She's not well. The pregnancy, it's making her delusional." I turned to him, my eyes blazing. Delusional. Was I delusional when I found the emails from Marcus Thorne, Adrian? The ones where you discussed funneling money through the shell corporation you named the West African Agricultural Fund. The name Marcus Thorne, though unknown to most in the room, clearly struck a chord with a select few. I saw a man at a table near the front go pale, his eyes darting nervously towards the exit. The trap was sprung. Was I delusional when I found the bank statements? I pressed on, my voice rising with each question, a crescendo of righteous fury. The statements that show millions of dollars donations from many of you in this very room being diverted to offshore accounts, money that was supposed to be building schools and wells in Africa, was instead buying yachts, private jets, and a penthouse for your mistress, Serena Vance. The name of his mistress hung in the air like a poisoned dart, finding its mark with deadly accuracy. The whispers erupted into a cacophony of shocked exclamations. The photographers, who had been held at bay at the edges of the room, now surged forward, their cameras flashing like a strobe light, capturing every nuance of Adrian's crumbling composure. "This is slander lies!" Adrian roared, his face a grotesque mask of rage and desperation. He lunged for my microphone, but I was ready for him. I sidestepped, holding the USB drive aloft for all to see. "I have proof," I declared, my voice ringing with an unshakable conviction. "Everything is on this drive. The emails, the bank statements, the photographs of you and Serena in the love nest you bought with money meant for starving children." I turned my attention to the tech booth at the back of the ballroom. I have a request for the audio-visual team. There's a file on this drive labeled The Truth. I'd like you to play it, on the big screen, for everyone to see." A stunned silence fell once more, even the photographers freezing in their tracks. The audacity of my request was breathtaking. I was not just accusing my husband, I was presenting the evidence for his conviction in the court of public opinion. Adrian's face had gone from red to a deathly white. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a look of utter abject terror. He knew what was on that drive. He knew that I had him, that his carefully constructed world was about to be obliterated before his very eyes. "Don't you dare!" He seethed, his voice a low, desperate plea. "Isabella, think about our baby. Think about our family." "I am thinking about my baby," I retorted, my voice thick with emotion. "I am thinking about the kind of world I want to bring my child into, a world where truth matters, a world where men like you are not celebrated, but held accountable for their actions." My eyes found the technician in the booth. He was looking at me, his expression a mixture of shock and something else. Admiration. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. For a moment, that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. The tension in the room was so thick, it was almost impossible to breathe. Then, with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room, the massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the logo of the Global Philanthropy Forum, flickered to life. The first image to appear was the email from Marcus Thorne, its damning words writ large for all to see. A low, horrified murmur rippled through the crowd. Then came the bank statements, a damning ledger of Adrian's greed, the flow of money from the so-called charity to his personal accounts undeniable. And then came the photographs. Adrian and Serena laughing on the balcony of the penthouse, their bodies intertwined. Adrian and Serena dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant, their hands clasped across the table. Adrian and Serena kissing the image, a brutal, irrefutable testament to his betrayal. A woman in the front row, a prominent socialite who had been one of Adrian's most vocal supporters, let out a horrified gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Another man, the CEO of a major bank, simply shook his head in disgust. But the final, most devastating piece of evidence was yet to come. The audio file began to play the voices of Adrian and Marcus Thorne, filling the ballroom, their conversation a cold, callous testament to their crimes. "The auditors are getting closer," Marcus's voice, tinny and distorted through the speakers, said. "Let them," Adrian's voice replied, cool and arrogant. "By the time they figure anything out, we'll have moved the money through 3 more shell companies. These people in New York society are so desperate to feel like they're making a difference, they'll believe anything. I could tell them I'm building a theme park on the moon, and they'd write me a check." The recording ended, plunging the room back into a stunned, echoing silence. The only sound was the frantic, desperate panting of the man standing next to me. I didn't need to look at Adrian. I could feel the waves of hatred and disgust rolling off the crowd, a tidal wave of revulsion directed squarely at the man they had been applauding just moments before. I had not just exposed his lies. I had held up a mirror to their own gullibility, their own willful blindness. I lowered the microphone, my part in this drama complete. I had brought the truth into the light, and now I would let the consequences unfold. The crowd, which had been frozen in a state of shock, was beginning to stir, the silence breaking as a low, angry growl began to emanate from the assembled guests. They were no longer a room of admirers. They were a mob, and they had just found their target. The man of the hour had become the man of the moment, and that moment was one of utter public disgrace. Adrian stood at the podium, a deer in the headlights of 1,000 accusations. The adoring spotlight that had moments before caressed him like a lover now seemed to burn to sear, to expose every flaw. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The brilliant, articulate man, who could charm investors out of billions and captivate an audience with a single, well-turned phrase, was rendered utterly speechless. The carefully rehearsed words of his acceptance speech, a symphony of false humility and grandiose promises, had turned to ash in his mouth. He was a statue of a fallen god. His handsome face, usually so animated with confidence, now a canvas of stark terror. His eyes darted around the room, not seeking adulation anymore, but searching for an escape route, an ally, a single friendly face in a sea of contempt. He found none. The faces that stared back at him were contorted with a mixture of shock, disgust, and a chillingly personal sense of betrayal. These were not just anonymous donors. These were his peers, his friends, the people he had played golf with, whose children went to the same elite schools as his future child was supposed to. He had not just stolen their money, he had made fools of them. The angry murmur in the ballroom was coalescing into something more focused, more potent. A single voice, clear and sharp, cut through the din. "Thief!" It was a man in the third row, a real estate mogul, known for his ruthless business practices, but who apparently drew the line at stealing from charities. The word hung in the air for a moment, then it was as if a dam had broken. "Fraud!" shouted another. "Liar!" A woman's voice shrieked, her face a mask of fury. The accusations came from all corners of the room, a volley of verbal stones hurled at the man on the stage. The crowd had turned. The sycophants had become a lynch mob. The energy in the room had shifted from celebratory to predatory, and Adrian was their prey. He finally turned to me, his eyes pleading, desperate. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear that was almost pitiful to behold. "Isabella, please, tell them it's a lie, a misunderstanding." He stammered, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the rising tide of anger from the audience. I simply looked at him, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. There was no pity there, no lingering affection. The man I had loved was a ghost, a fiction he had created. This trembling, pathetic creature before me was a stranger. "The truth," I said, my voice barely a whisper for his ears, "only is not a misunderstanding, Adrian." The master of ceremonies finally jolted out of his stupor, scrambled to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's have some order," he pleaded, his voice cracking with panic. But no one was listening to him. The situation had spiraled far beyond his control. The first person to act was a woman I recognized as Beatrice Vanderbilt, a doyenne of New York society whose family name was synonymous with old money and unassailable integrity. She stood up, her regal posture a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around her. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She simply picked up her wine glass and with a look of utter disdain directed at Adrian, she turned it upside down, letting the expensive red wine bleed into the pristine white tablecloth. It was a gesture of profound contempt, more damning than any shouted insult. One by one, others followed her lead. At table after table, glasses were overturned, the spreading crimson stains a silent collective judgment. It was a powerful, visually stunning rejection, a stain on Adrian's reputation, that would never wash out. The security guards, who had been hovering uncertainly, now began to move with purpose, not to protect Adrian, but to control the increasingly volatile crowd. People were getting to their feet, their faces contorted with rage. A few were even starting to move towards the stage, their intentions clear. It was then that Adrian, seeing the last of his support evaporate, finally broke. With a strangled cry of despair, he turned and fled. He didn't use the stairs. He stumbled off the side of the stage, nearly tripping over a speaker, and scrambled towards a side exit. His custom Tom Ford tuxedo, once a symbol of his success, now looking like the ill-fitting costume of a failed actor. The photographers, sensing the climax of the drama, descended like a pack of wolves, their flashes creating a blinding, disorienting strobe effect. They chased after him, their shouted questions, a brutal, relentless chorus. "Mr. Sterling, is it true? What about the offshore accounts? Are you resigning as CEO?" He didn't answer. He simply ran a man stripped of his dignity, his legacy, his entire identity in the space of 10 minutes. As the heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, a strange, eerie silence fell over the ballroom. It was the silence of a battlefield after the main engagement is over, the air, thick with the smell of gunpowder and the shock of what had just transpired. All eyes turned to me. I was still on the stage, the lone figure at the center of the storm. The anger that had been directed at Adrian now morphed into something else, a complex mixture of pity, respect, and a morbid, insatiable curiosity. I was no longer just the pregnant wife. I was the avenging angel, the whistleblower, the woman who had dared to tear down the king in his own court. My legs, which had been so steady, suddenly felt weak. The adrenaline that had fueled my righteous fury began to recede, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The enormity of what I had done washed over me. I had not just exposed my husband. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of my own life, and the fallout was only just beginning. I felt a gentle touch on my arm. I turned to see Beatrice Vanderbilt standing beside me. Her eyes, which had been so cold and hard a moment ago, now held a surprising warmth, a glimmer of empathy. "Are you all right, my dear?" she asked, her voice soft. I could only nod the words catching in my throat. "That was the bravest thing I have ever seen," she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. She then turned to the stunned master of ceremonies. "Someone get this woman a chair and a glass of water, and for God's sake, get these vultures." She gestured towards the remaining photographers, who were now trying to get a shot of me out of here. Her words, spoken with the unquestionable authority of her station, had an immediate effect. The security guards began to clear the room, the photographers grumbling but compliant. The master of ceremonies, grateful for the direction, rushed to find me a chair. As I sank into it, the full weight of the past few months, the sleepless nights, the gnawing anxiety, the heartbreak of my husband's betrayal came crashing down on me. A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped my eye and traced a path down my cheek. Then another and another. The steely resolve that had carried me through the evening crumbled, and I began to weep, not with sadness for the man I had lost, but with the overwhelming relief of a battle hard won, and the terrifying uncertainty of the future that now lay before me and my unborn child. The crowd, the once adoring, then enraged mob, watched me in silence. Their faces a gallery of complex emotions. Their judgment of Adrian complete their verdict on me, yet to be decided. The revelation was over, but the story, my story, was far from finished. The moments that followed Adrian's desperate flight were a blur of fragmented images and muffled sounds like a dream from which you struggle to wake. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis, a space designed for carefully orchestrated celebrations, had become the epicenter of a social earthquake. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and betrayed trust, hummed with a nervous energy. Beatrice Vanderbilt remained by my side, a surprisingly steadfast anchor in the swirling vortex of chaos. She had dispatched someone for water and another to find my coat. Her commands cutting through the residual shock in the room with practiced efficiency. She was a woman accustomed to taking charge, and tonight she had appointed herself my protector. "Don't you worry about a thing, my dear," she murmured, patting my hand as I sat still, trembling on the chair they had brought to the stage. "You did what you had to do. You did the right thing." Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves, but they couldn't completely silence the discordant symphony of reactions that filled the room. The initial unified wave of anger towards Adrian had fractured into 100 different streams of conversation. I could hear snippets as the guests, recovering from their collective shock, began to process the evening's events. "I can't believe it. I just signed a check for his foundation last week." Always thought he was too good to be true. That smile never reached his eyes. And the mistress, Serena Vance from his own company. The audacity. What will happen to Sterling Innovations? The stock will plummet on Monday. Their focus had shifted from the moral outrage of the deception to the practical financial and social consequences. They were picking over the carcass of Adrian's reputation, their whispers the sound of vultures circling. I saw people huddled in small groups, their heads close together, their phones glowing as they frantically scrolled through news feeds, no doubt waiting for the first online reports to break. The story was already escaping the confines of the ballroom, spreading like a virus into the digital world. My own phone, which I had left at the table, was now in Beatrice's possession. She held it up the screen, a relentless, strobing beacon of incoming calls and messages. "I think it's best we keep this off for now," she said, her expression grim. I nodded numbly. I couldn't face the deluge of questions, the feigned concern, the morbid curiosity of friends and acquaintances. A young woman, one of the event organizers, approached the stage hesitantly. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. "Mrs. Sterling, your car is ready whenever you are. We've arranged for you to leave through a private exit. The front entrance is impossible." I understood what she meant. The paparazzi who had chased Adrian out would now be lying in wait for me, hoping for a quote, a tearful photograph, the next chapter in the scandal that would grace the front pages of tomorrow's tabloids. Beatrice stood up, her posture radiating an aristocratic authority. "I'll take her," she announced, not to me, but to the room at large. It was a declaration of allegiance, a clear signal to everyone present which side she was on. In the cutthroat world of New York society, where alliances shifted like sand, this was a significant gesture. She was drawing a line in the sand and daring anyone to cross it. She helped me to my feet, my body feeling strangely heavy, the baby a solid, reassuring weight within me. As we made our way off the stage, a path seemed to clear for us. The whispers didn't stop, but they were no longer directed at me with malice. Instead, the faces I saw held a new complex expression, a blend of pity, admiration, and a healthy dose of fear. I was no longer just the victim. I was the giant slayer, a woman who had demonstrated a terrifying capacity to upend the established order. We bypassed the main ballroom and were led through a labyrinth of service corridors, the glamour of the St. Regis giving way to a world of stainless steel linoleum floors and the clatter of kitchen staff. It was a jarring transition from the pinnacle of high society to its unglamorous underbelly, a fitting metaphor for the evening itself. The private exit led to a quiet side street, where a sleek black Bentley Beatrice's personal car was waiting its engine, purring softly. Her driver, a stoic man with a placid face, held the door open for us. As I slid onto the cool leather of the back seat, the sheer exhaustion I had been holding at bay washed over me in a dizzying wave. The drive to my, or what was once our mansion, was a silent one. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, the familiar landmarks of a life that no longer felt like my own. What was I going back to? A house filled with memories that were now tainted, a home that was no longer a sanctuary, but a crime scene. When we pulled up to the imposing iron gates, they were for the first time since I had moved in, closed and locked. A new security detail, men I didn't recognize, stood guard. Beatrice spoke to them through the car's intercom system, her voice calm and authoritative, and the gates swung open. "I took the liberty of arranging some proper security for you," she explained as we drove up the long, winding driveway. "Adrian's men are gone. You can't trust them. These men work for me. They will ensure no one bothers you, least of all him." I was too tired to even process the full import of her actions, the incredible foresight and generosity she was showing me. All I could do was whisper a choked, "Thank you." The house was dark, save for a single light burning in the foyer. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of home, a mixture of lemon polish and fresh flowers, felt alien. The silence was oppressive, a stark contrast to the chaos of the evening. It was the silence of abandonment. Adrian was gone. His presence, which had once filled every room, had been erased. Beatrice didn't leave me at the door. She walked me inside, her hand on my arm, a steadying presence. She surveyed the grand marble-floored foyer, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be alone tonight, Isabella," she said gently. "Do you have family? You can call a friend who can come and stay." I thought of my parents retired and living a quiet life in Florida, and my sister a teacher in a small town in Oregon. Calling them now in the middle of the night and trying to explain the cataclysm that had just occurred felt like an impossible task. The friends I had made in New York were mostly Adrian's friends, their loyalty I now realized as transactional as his philanthropy. I don't know," I stammered, the full weight of my isolation crashing down on me. Beatrice nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "All right," she said, her tone decisive. "My daughter Amelia is about your age. She lives just a few blocks away. I'm going to call her. She'll come and stay with you for a few days. You won't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but you will not be alone in this house." And just like that, she took control, arranging my life with the same ease she would arrange a charity luncheon. While she stepped away to make the call, I wandered into the living room, a vast, impersonal space with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the manicured gardens. On the mantelpiece above the cold, unused fireplace was a collection of framed photographs. Us on our wedding day, beaming with a happiness that now felt like a cruel joke. Us on a yacht in the Mediterranean, the picture of carefree wealth. Us at last year's award ceremony. Adrian's arm wrapped protectively around me. With a sudden, violent surge of anger, I swept my arm across the mantelpiece. The photographs crashed to the floor, the sound of shattering glass echoing the shattering of my life. I stared down at the fragments of our fabricated happiness, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This was the real aftermath. Not the public scandal, but the private wreckage, The emotional debris that I would have to navigate in the days, weeks, and months to come. When Beatrice returned, she found me standing amidst the broken glass tears streaming down my face. She didn't say a word. She simply came to me and wrapped her arms around me, holding me, as I sobbed not like a society grande dame, but like a mother. And in the cold, silent ruin of my perfect life, that small act of human kindness was the first tentative ray of light in the profound darkness that had enveloped me. The crowd had turned on Adrian, but in their place a single powerful ally had stepped forward, and for now that was enough. The fallout from what the tabloids dubbed the philanthropy phenomenon was not a gentle wave of consequence. It was a tsunami that obliterated Adrian's world overnight. Before the sun even rose on Saturday, the story had gone viral, a digital wildfire consuming the reputation he had spent a decade meticulously constructing. The first casualty was his empire. In the volatile world of after-hours trading, the stock of sterling innovations nosedived into an abyss. The company so inextricably linked to the cult of Adrian's personality was now shackled to his disgrace. The audio clip of him boasting about his gullible investors became a late-night talk show staple and the company's unofficial epitaph, the board of directors. A group of powerful figures who had once lauded his genius moved with the swift, merciless precision of sharks scenting blood. An emergency meeting was convened, and by Saturday evening, a stark press release confirmed the inevitable Adrian Sterling was terminated as CEO, and a full-scale forensic investigation into the company's finances was underway. His allies, his so-called friends, had severed the limb to save the body, casting him out without a moment's hesitation. Simultaneously, the gears of justice began to grind. Citing the evidence I had presented on a single USB drive, the New York Attorney General's office announced a formal investigation into a litany of potential charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering. The FBI soon followed their interest, piqued by the international nature of his shell corporations. The intricate architecture of his deceit, once his fortress, was now his prison, being systematically dismantled by the very authorities he had held in such arrogant contempt. His personal world imploded with equal finality. Serena Vance, the fiery-haired mistress for whom he'd torched his life, proved to be as transactional as his charity. She vanished. While reporters swarmed the penthouse bought with stolen money, she was already gone, having cleared out her belongings in the dead of night. A whisper in a gossip column suggested she was on a one-way flight to a sun-drenched country with no extradition treaty, a ghost leaving him to face the inferno alone. The ultimate betrayal, however, came from his partner in crime. Marcus Thorne was arrested by federal agents at his sprawling Hamptons estate on Sunday morning. Faced with decades in prison, his loyalty evaporated. His lawyer immediately informed prosecutors that Marcus was prepared to offer a full confession and testify against Adrian in exchange for leniency. It was the final fatal nail in Adrian's legal coffin. And where was the man himself he had gone to ground? In the days following his humiliating flight from the St. Regis, a media manhunt of epic proportions ensued. But Adrian was gone. He did, however, try to reach me. The phone Beatrice had taken from me was a testament to his spiraling desperation, logging over 100 missed calls. His texts painted a portrait of a man unraveling in real time. Isabella, please, we have to talk. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Don't let them do this to our family, to our baby. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Just tell me what you want. I'll do anything. I read them in the quiet solitude of the mansion, now guarded by Beatrice's professional security team. His words, once capable of bending my reality, were now just pathetic manipulative noise. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I deleted the messages and blocked his number without a reply. The true, horrifying depth of his cruelty was revealed to me not by the news, but by my own legal team. I sat in the vast, silent living room with Clara, my lead attorney, a sharp, empathetic woman who treated me not as a victim, but as a survivor. She laid out a series of corporate documents, her expression grim. "We've been untangling the structure of his shell companies," Clara said, her finger tracing a line of legalese. "And we found this. He made you a director on 2 of them. He forged your signature." I stared at her, the blood draining from my face. "What does that mean?" Clara's eyes met mine, and they were filled with a cold fury on my behalf. "It means he was building a firewall, Isabella. If the scheme ever collapsed, if investigators started closing in, their first stop would have been the board members. He was setting you up to be the fall guy. He would have claimed he knew nothing that his pregnant wife handled those accounts. He wasn't just cheating on you. He was willing to send you to prison to save himself." The air left my lungs. It was a level of cold, calculated evil I couldn't have imagined. This wasn't just greed or infidelity. It was a complete absence of humanity. The last vestiges of any lingering pity I might have felt for him turned to ice. A week after the ceremony, the manhunt ended. Adrian wasn't found in a private jet bound for the Caymans or a luxury villa in Dubai. He was found in a cheap, grimy motel in Queens, located when he tried to use a credit card that was instantly declined. He had run out of cash. The images of his arrest were stark and brutal. The titan of industry unshaven, his eyes hollow with paranoia, being led out of a $50 a night room in handcuffs. His custom Tom Ford suit, the symbol of his power and success, was rumpled and stained the costume of a failed king. As reporters swarmed him, he looked directly into a camera, his face a mask of desperation. "Isabella!" He screamed, a raw, pathetic cry that was swallowed by the chaos. I watched it all on the news, sitting in the safety of my new life, the life he had almost destroyed. I felt a grim, undeniable satisfaction in seeing him brought so low. But as the police car pulled away, I also felt a strange, phantom ache, a deep and profound sadness. Not for the broken man on the screen, but for the man I thought I had married, the beautiful lie I had loved so completely. His unraveling was a public spectacle, but for me it was a brutal but necessary amputation. The cancer had been removed, and now, finally, I could begin to heal. The months following Adrian's arrest were a quiet, deliberate reconstruction. His trial was a media sensation I chose to ignore, providing my testimony privately. The evidence was insurmountable. Adrian Sterling was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for fraud, and money laundering, his name forever cemented as a cautionary tale. Our divorce was swift. I wanted nothing from his tainted empire. The mansion, the art, the cars were all liquidated, the funds placed in a trust to compensate the victims of his phantom charity. I walked away not with riches, but with my freedom. That freedom found a home in a light-filled apartment on the Upper West Side, a sanctuary I built with the help of Beatrice and Amelia, whose friendship had become my bedrock. The true turning point came on a crisp autumn day, with the birth of my son. I named him Ethan, meaning strong, and as I held him, his tiny fingers curled around mine. The void of Adrian's betrayal was filled with a love so profound. It healed me. I knew one day I would have to tell Ethan about his father, not with bitterness, but with sad honesty, teaching him that he was not defined by the mistakes of a man he would never know. Fueled by this new purpose, I used what remained of my own funds to start a small, legitimate foundation. It was quiet work dedicated to supporting single mothers who, like me, were building new beginnings from wreckage. Its impact wasn't measured in headlines, but in the tangible relief it provided to women in need. A year after that fateful night, I watched Ethan take his first wobbly steps in a sunny park. I was no longer Isabella Sterling, the millionaire's wife. I was just Isabella, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had walked through fire and found a new, more authentic wealth on the other side. The gilded cage was a memory, and in its place, I had built a real life. As I watched my son pick himself up after a tumble, a determined smile on his face, I knew with absolute certainty that my story was just beginning. The story of Isabella and Adrian is a raw, unflinching look at the corrosive power of lies and the incredible strength it takes to bring the truth to light. It's a reminder that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in integrity, courage, and the love that endures even after the most devastating betrayals. Isabella's journey from a silenced wife to a powerful force for change shows us that even in the darkest of times, we have the power to rewrite our own narrative and build a new, more authentic life. If her story of resilience and rebirth resonated with you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with others who appreciate tales of strength and justice, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more compelling stories that will stay with you long after you've finished watching. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey.